Okay, we're going to an episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff to have a really special, prototype preview for you guys from a new watch brand. Now, they are called Ocean to Orbit, and they are a new microbrand upstart founded by two car designers based out of Melbourne, Australia, with a shared passion for mechanical wristwatches, whose pretty much their conversation on historical expedition watches led to the idea of starting a brand with the goal of creating a piece designed to withstand similarly harsh conditions, but in a more versatile modern package, inspired, of course, by the watches worn by the great pioneers and explorers of the mid-20th century. In terms of the type of watch, of course, I'd consider this an everyday adventure watch. Some key characteristics and language around these types of watches. Of course, you're going to want that sporty, legible, and tough combination. This is the Lhotse in the classic steel or the black dial, and it is a pre-production prototype named after the mountain in Nepal, which is actually the fourth highest peak in the world. And really fun fact here, one of the original prototypes of this watch was actually put to the test by a brave Nepalese mountaineer who successfully summited Lhotse back in 2022. So that is really cool. Don't be surprised if, as this brand grows, you guys hear more about those types of adventurous legends, because I just think that that's really awesome, because you really don't have to do stuff like that to kind of capture, the aesthetic, but the fact that they really wanted to capture the spirit just goes to tell you that this is really more about love for the genre and backed by enthusiasm versus entrepreneurship. Now, in terms of some of the production improvements that will be seen on the final release, of course, there will be an upgraded milled clasp, improved anti-reflective coating on the sapphire crystal, as well as improved lume in making sure that everything is applied, and in terms of getting everything to match as well. So a lot of great things available. This is going to go for $8.95 full retail direct, or you can get it on pre-order for $7.95. And man, this thing is a looker. So with that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. Ooh, this dial, guys, it is so cool, very subtle. But then depending on the lighting situation, you can see that vertical brushing really brings it to life and just adds another element that makes this watch feel almost a bit experimental. And I think that's one of my favorite things about it, is it just gives you that adventurous, really pushing the limits type of vibe. And the even cooler thing is that this is their first iteration, right? So everything after this, as long as this is as successful as I hope it would be, is just going to be an improvement over time. So in terms of the sizing, guys, this really hits some beautiful sweet spots. 38.5 millimeters in diameter, 11.5 millimeters thick, 47 millimeters lug to lug, and then you're going to get stainless steel, which is mainly brushed, which does give it a nice tooly aesthetic, but you are going to have some nice high polished accents that really do showcase, again, the level of fitment, finish, and just the overall level of attention to detail that you're going to see on this timepiece. I mean, look at this this end link here with the 3D milling. Every time I see that, I try to point it out because I appreciate it, because it's so easy to just engrave two lines there to blend in the flow. But man, look at this thing. And one thing just off the bat is that I love that this really captures that spirit without being a direct homage. To me, it gives me very much, I'd say, a cross between Oyster Perpetual and Aqua Terra vibes, which I think is an amazing happy medium. But I would say in terms of the look, I mean, it's not an homage to either of those, at least not a direct homage. I think it honors those designs in the way that the word homage should be used, right? It's not just slapping on a new logo onto the same old design. So I do like that. Now, The crystal, again, this is a pre-production prototype, but it is a box dome sapphire with inner AR coating, and that AR coating is going to be improved. And as you guys can see, as I move it around in the studio, under the studio lights here, of course, it's hard to negate a direct reflection like that, but I will say I am happy to hear that they are going to improve the anti-reflective treatment, because I did find it to be a little bit shiny. I think shinier than they would want because of all these beautiful satin matted surfaces that are on this watch. So really great to hear that they were doing that without anyone even really asking for it. Now, in terms of some other details, let's see here. So screw down crown signed. So that's going to mean you're getting that confidence inspiring 100 meters of water resistance, which is great. You don't have to worry about it being plugged or unplugged, or, like say pulled or not. As long as it's screwed down, you're good to go. Now, getting into the movement, another interesting choice, guys. They're using the Swiss automatic STP 1-21, and although you can't see it underneath, this really nicely done, and you guys can see that I really do like the branding here. Check that out. The logos, it's all very clean. The applied logo on the dial, very, very cool. All ties in to this beautiful and very relatively slim case back. And inside, yeah, you're going to get a Swiss movement. Now, it's the STP 1-21, which there's not too much information out about it, but it essentially replaced the older STP 111 ETA 2824/SW200 clone. So you're going to get that 40 hours of power reserve, 4 hertz sweep, 28,800 vibration per hour in terms of that beat rate, hacking, hand winding, all that. But the nice thing is this is actually a no date movement, so it has been modified to where you're not going to have the ghost position. And also, if you are having, some hesitations about the STP 111. Again, this is the STP 121, so it does supersede that model. And I think if you kind of dig in, you'll find that, yeah, the STP 111 wasn't the most desirable amongst kind of those early batch of ETA clones that became readily available. But it's nice to know that, of course, they have gone and fixed a lot of those issues and created a new nomenclature for it. So even to that extent, and I haven't seen any poor reviews or any negative feedback about this newer iteration. And of course, in terms of experiencing it, I think it's done well. I mean, you guys can see that Zodiac, of course, within the Fossil group, owns STP. They've been using those STP movements pretty flawlessly. So I think it's great to see them also trickle in to watches at a nice affordable price point under $1,000. Now, this dial, guys, the vertical brushing is gorgeous. I think it's a huge part of what makes this watch awesome. You have a textured dial, but it's not, gimmicky. It just feels very organic. It feels natural to the aesthetic, and I absolutely appreciate that. You're getting applied indices, which are beautifully done, and no, they're not anything, groundbreaking in terms of the shapes or anything like that. At the same time, they're not directly referencing anything, right? Like you can see they're skinnier, and then they get a little bit wider at those cardinal points, and then of course you do get the wider even triangle there at 12 o'clock. So it looks good, and it doesn't look different just to be different, which can be an issue, especially when you want something that looks very clean and classic, which I think this really achieves. So I dig that. No date movement with a no date dial. That's what it's all about. You're also getting Swiss Superluminova BGW9. You're getting 20 millimeter lug width, guys. I mean, you don't have to make an excuse for this brand, because they're doing what you want. Drilled lugs, 20 millimeters, drilled lugs, very clean, everything milled, everything solid, screw pin construction, fully articulated. Check that out. And I like the nice short links here. It kind of gives me, again, those kind of Omega vibes, and I like that vintage Omega vibes, so I dig that. And then, of course, this sample pre-production, it does have the milled folding section, but what you guys can see here is the triggers are just essentially stamped, and the clasp itself is stamped, although they did go out of their way to give it a nice little chamfer polish. And you know what? Honestly, I think they could have got away with bringing this to market just like this. I think because of the slimness, It's totally a fine trade-off. But the fact that, again, without anybody really asking for it, they're willing to do you one better and get in another milled clasp, fully milled, with the triggers and the actual case section there being milled. I think that's awesome. And and the nice thing is, I already know aesthetically it's fantastic. And then it just, when the production model comes around, it's going to be more of a question of functionally, it's going to be even beefier. So I dig that. Now, it does only offer 3 positions of micro adjust, but with how short these links are, they're essentially like half links. You don't need to have a wide array of micro adjustments. Would it have been nice to get the toolless micro adjust? Yes, it would have been nice. Is it a deal breaker for me? Absolutely not. They're much nicer watches that still have manual micro adjust, to include, of course, not just modern watches, but a bevy of neo vintage and vintage pieces that are going to have much worse construction than this. So you can't really get upset at something like that. I think it would have helped with the value proposition. Absolutely. But in terms of, is it a deal breaker for me? No, it's not, mostly because I love the aesthetic and then the execution here. So many smart choices, with the full articulation, the beautiful finishes. I mean, it's just, for me, it jumps right out, and in the metal, it just stands out even more. So with that said, let's actually get it on the wrist and see how it wears. Okay, guys, as you can see on my 7.5-inch wrist, really great wrist presence, beautiful taper on that bracelet, guys. Tapers down to 16 millimeters, so very classic. Of course, if I get my wrist a bit too close to the camera lens, you're going to see some perspective distortion, which essentially is going to make the watch appear larger than it actually is. Check that out, kind of like when you look through the peek hole through your door, right? There's a bit of that fish eye effect the closer you get. But one thing I like to do is keep my wrist nice and low, and then just tighten up the frame here so you guys can get still a detailed look, but just add a bit of a truer aspect ratio. Look how beautifully that sits on the wrist. It does have a beautiful amount of wrist presence. I think, scale wise at 38.5, it's pretty much perfection, but it does have some great proportions as well that help work for it. Look at how beautifully it sits on the wrist. Look how thin visually that mid case appears as it sits. It has a nice little drape to it, nice curvature there, but nothing that feels too inorganic. It just has a nice flow to it, which I can absolutely appreciate. And then, of course, that flow is accentuated by that high polished bevel. Even the flow between the crystal there and the bezel looks good. That signed crown, again, it just gets the point across. This just feels like that adventure ready expedition piece, but it doesn't feel completely vintage inspired. I love that. I mean, I could see this in a film, as a modern timepiece for a crew that's headed out, whether it be, ocean to orbit, right? Like whether you're going to the depths or you were going into space. I feel like this would just look fantastic. And again, I get carried away with that, just because I enjoy that idea of just nailing the theme. And those are the things that really speak to me. Of course, there's going to be a lot of brands that will release great models, great watches. But when you have something that from a theme perspective and a branding perspective really comes together, I just think that's special. And it's just harder to find these days because it's so easy to just put out something that, again, is just a cheaper version of something else that is desirable without thinking about that intrinsic value. And would you want this? Like if this had a different name on the dial, if this was a Nomos, right? Like if this was a Longines, if this was a Certina, I'd be thrilled. I would, if this had a brand, with some longevity behind it and they released something like this, it would be awesome. So the fact that this is a new brand, every brand has to start somewhere, guys. And to start off with such a cool watch from 2 really cool enthusiasts, guys. I mean, you can follow the links. You'll find out that these guys are like the head designers for for, I think, Ford Australia, at least at the time of filming this. So very cool to have, again, trained designers, really making their way into the space, following their passions and their enthusiasm. And, because they're providing just something that is so familiar and so easy to understand and read in terms of the theme, but at the same time still quite refreshing and contemporary. So very, very cool, guys. I'm gushing. So let's go ahead, get this off the wrist, set up for some loom shots, the light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Hey, look at that. Now in the dark, very, very nice. And again, this is just a pre-production prototype. They're improving all of this for the production model, which is even more exciting. But one thing I always like to work in is a bit of a low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it is nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting. Guys, the textures, look at that. Even in the monochromatic colorway, the black, it just comes to life in such a cool way. And I love that. I mean, when you guys saw, this thing looked very much at this other tilted angle when you don't see those vertical brush marks. It just looks like a black dial. Look at that. It's a black dial, high contrast, highly legible. There is some font on the text, but it's well balanced and it's minimalist. I feel like it all belongs. I wouldn't taper any of that, because I think it also ties in beautifully to that outer chapter ring, which they very smartly designated those increments. Yeah. Ooh. I'm digging this, guy. I am a fan. Wow, look at that. And honestly, originally when I was looking at the pre-production renders, the blue stuck. I mean, I'm a blue dial guy, and I was just like, I was set. I wanted the blue. They sent the black, and I was prepared to enjoy it, but I didn't think it was going to win me over like this. Like, check this out, guys. If you're fans of the channel, make sure you tune back in, after whenever the full release happens for these, because I definitely want to add one of these to my permanent collection. This is just too cool. Look at that dial. Whew. And it's still ultimately legible, even when you're getting all that visual play, which can't be said for every single interesting dial. Sometimes when those interesting dials catch light, they lose a bit in terms of that legibility. Here, I mean, my goodness, this thing's gorgeous. Whew. And yeah, look down at it right now, right? It's very much just looks like a black dial, which is wild. So for me, guys, closing thoughts on the wrist, perfect Goldilocks sizing, definitely giving some major awesome Aqua Terra meets Oyster perpetual vibes, which is a good place to be, because again, you put this next to either of those watches and I don't think anyone's going to say, oh, that looks like an homage watch. In terms of model variants, there are 4 standard colorways that are going to be available at launch, plus a 50-piece limited edition, guys. Check the links in the description for more details. So for me, guys, and then when I get into comparable models, the Lhotse fits right with some of the similarly themed top microbrand offerings from the likes of Traska, Clemence, Halios, and even Christopher Ward. And, I hold those brands in very high regard, and there's other brands that are out there, but in terms of this space, something that's directly comparable in that everyday adventure category, that it's also a piece that can dress up, because there can be some GADA watches that are a lot more one-dimensional, and I think that's one of the pieces where I really appreciate is when that go anywhere, do anything also means that it can be dressed up nicely, and it has a bit of fine finishing and a bit of a little extra visual interest for you to wear, even when you're not out adventuring and putting the the hyper legible, hyper capable theme to good use. So for me, guys, bottom line, while it does lack the convenience of a toolless micro adjust clasp, which I'm sure some of you, I see it in the comments, it can be a big sticking point for a lot of folks and a lot of buyers, like, hey, once you go, you can't go back. I'm not that way. I'm totally fine. And to see something that fits and flows like this, I'm not going to be missing that too much, as long as, of course, it still has the manual micro adjust, which does mean that you can still dial it in pretty easy with a push pin tool. Now, yeah, this just, the design, the execution, for me, guys, it still makes it a top contender. You know, and within these really upper echelon models, for that kind of ultra competitive, go anywhere, do anything, watch under $1,000 segment. Like under $1,000, this is really great. Like this is up there again with the likes of watches that have been really solid, or have recently, like Clemence, like they haven't been around forever, but that new model they did that I reviewed not too long ago really stuck out for me as just like, it was really well done. And I get a similar feeling here, where it's a new brand to me anyway. This one's a new brand to everybody. But yeah, I'm just, they really knocked my socks off with this one. But let me know what you all think down in the comments below. If you like the video, please do hit like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.